Guys, in today's video, we're going to be working on a Chevrolet Cruze, a 2012 with the 1.4 liter Ecotec turbocharged engine. And the owner's been saying the check engine light's been coming on and going off and coming on and going off. And we hooked it up to GDS2 with our MDI, and we're not showing any current codes. But there is a history code of a P0171. So rather than try to diag anything with GDS2 because the code's currently not manifesting, this engine has some very common root causes for that code. And so what we're going to do is just go straight under the hood and see if we can eliminate those common problems to see if we get lucky. All right, guys, let's put some light on here. Now, to start debugging this code, this P0171, particularly when it's intermittent like on this vehicle, we're going to start with some simple tests that I'm going to show you. And if those tests don't pan out, then we'll go to more common tests like looking for air intake leaks or looking for vacuum leaks in the ductwork around the intake manifold. But on this particular engine, this 1.4 liter turbocharged Ecotec engine, we're going to start with this. Now this one here has got the dipstick here and the filler tube here. So this video applies to what would be called an RPO LUH or an LUJ version of this engine. We're going to remove this sight cover first. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4 snap tabs here, 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 and here. And the reason we're going to do that is we can short circuit this process, and I'll show you some service bulletins after we do this that are a common failure point. The PCV, the positive crankcase ventilation design on this particular engine is rather unique. You've got this pipe that runs from the intake manifold all the way down to the turbocharger unit. This is the PCV bypass pipe. It has one-way valves at the ends. Underneath this pipe is a bypass valve that's part of the intake manifold. That's going to be our second check. But as part of the valve cover, we've got this PCV orifice port right here. If you zoom in, you can see there's a little hole here. And underneath this is a diaphragm. And what we're looking for in this first test, we don't see the first part of the test, which would be oil coming out of this, so we don't have that problem. I'm going to have to start the engine for the second test. We're going to be looking for a vacuum leak. And not a vacuum leak on the outgoing, but vacuum coming in. We should not have any vacuum at this port. And if we do, then we're going to go on to the next test. So that's the first thing we're going to check here. Now, how do you do this test? Well, you got to have the engine running. But you can put your finger up here, or you can get a little piece of paper. I'm going to probably do both because I don't know how bad this is going to be, if it's going to be enough, if you can hear it. Sometimes if it's really loud, you can hear like a whistling noise if you put your finger up there. But if not, we'll do the paper test. Let me go start the engine, and we will go do that test while the engine's running. All right, with the engine running, zoom into this port. I can feel like a slight vacuum. Let me take a piece of paper. So we can already hear the sound when we put our finger over there, but we can just take a piece of paper. This is just a Post-it note cut in half. And we're going to see if that stays put, and it does. So that tells us we've got vacuum coming in here. So that orifice, this diaphragm for this orifice, is definitely damaged. So let me shut the engine off. All right, so we know the orifice is damaged. Most people would then jump to, okay, well, let's replace the valve cover. That's not what you're going to do yet, because now we got to figure out why is this damaged. So that's the next test we're going to move to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this pipe from this intake manifold, and we're going to do an inspection for the bypass valve. So let me grab a tool we can use to free up these little clips here. So we got a little retaining clip here. And we got this guy right here that we're just going to kind of coax apart. Just like that. Now this pipe, let me tell you something about this pipe. The plastic on this pipe is super, super brittle. So you want to be super gentle with this guy. So I'm just trying to get him out of here and close this clip so he'll sit like this. This one he's not going to come out of until we actually remove it here. Now if we zoom in a little bit more, there's a metal retaining clamp here. We're going to pry that off. And normally you're supposed to just be able to leave it like that, but sometimes it can grab if there's any wear inside, and you can go ahead and pull it off the rest of the way, but I'm going to try to leave it like that. And then I'm going to grab a plastic tool that I can pry with here. I'm going to see if I can do it from this angle. I normally like to do it from the other angle, from the opposite side. So I'm just going to give it a little twist. Try to free it up. And again, I'm trying to be super gentle not to break this pipe, because this is just a diag we're trying to do. We're not trying to add to our repair bill. And now I'm going to try to lift up with my finger here. Yeah, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this metal retainer the rest of the way off. Right there. I'm just going to sit it right up here on the window for a second. There we go. Now it's off. And so what I'm going to want to do is look down inside this pipe. Now I'm going to put a camera down there for you guys. But I'm trying to see if this bypass valve is still there. So let me grab a camera just right over here, and we will both look live together at the state of this valve. All right. So coming down in here, you see that little orange piece right there? That tells us that the bypass valve is still in place. Let's see if we can get a side view of that. Right there. I was hoping we'd get a side view of that with this. Maybe we've got some crud on our camera. But that tells us that this is okay. It's not missing. It's in place. It may be dirty. So one of the things I might decide to do here is clean this. Now normally this valve's missing is a good indicator of why the PCV orifice diaphragm is damaged up here. But this is not. So we still got to figure out what caused this to be damaged. It's not this. So now we're going to move on to the next test. Let me get this out of the way. I'm going to go in here and clean this. I'll show you it looks like cleaned up, and then we'll go do the next test. All right, guys, I went to clean inside the air intake. This is the particular product I would use for something like that from CRC. There might be other brands, but this is the one I like. And we're trying to get everything clean in there, so you can see from these Q-tips that there was a lot of crud. But I started to notice as I got to smaller ones and trying to clean around our little nub, if we zoom in on this guy, you know, this orange discoloration is coming off that nub that we saw. And so that means that the silicone that bypass valve is made of, it's gotten very aged because it's starting to shed the surface. So let's go back to the camera. Cleaned up the side camera so we can actually use it here. Let's get our overhead light back on. And so when we look at this guy, right, we can see our outer nub is very clean, but I'm not seeing any orange through any of these ports that I've wiped off, right? So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, still kind of dirty on the side. 7 is kind of plugged up with dirt. I still got to clean a couple of these, but I don't think I'm going to bother, because if I don't see that orange, that means that the flapper valve for this bypass is probably broken off, and the only thing left in the intake is this nub. So this is probably a good segue to take a look at some of the service manual information and service bulletins so you can understand what am I seeing here and why am I telling you it's bad. So let's go take a look at some of that service info. All right, so like I said in the beginning of the video, this particular engine's got some quirks, and there are several service bulletins out. This one we're looking at here, P0171 DTC, this is some preliminary information. It came out in 2019, covering up through updating the model years to 2019. This is actually going to cover up to the video title in terms of years, probably 2021 on certain models with this particular engine. And we've already looked at this PCV orifice port, and we've already determined that it's leaking vacuum, so that we know that the diaphragm under here is shot. And so the only thing you can do to repair something like that is replace the camshaft cover. So we already know that. We were about to go do some of these other tests that they talk about doing, which is measuring vacuum off the dipstick port, right? They're just talking about putting an adapter on a pressure gauge. But when we were doing this cleaning, we skipped this because that was the next thing they were going to have us do, which we already did, removing this PCV pipe, right, so that we could get access to see this little nub. And then what you want to see with a side view camera is all this orange through those holes, right? And so all we're seeing is that nub in the middle. We're not seeing any orange at all. Now, is it possible it's all black and cruddy? Yeah, maybe. But we should see something out of one of them, and we don't see anything out of any of them. And so what I think is going on here is this nub might be the only thing left of this valve, and it has broken off on the other side. And that is what created the pressure differential that blew the diaphragm in the PCV orifice. They talk about this kind of problem in some other bulletins where you end up with having leaks, right? Because when you get this pressure differential, it'll start blowing the seals on the engine. The front crankshaft seal, the rear crankshaft seal, the camshaft cover seal, even the oil pan seal can end up going when this problem occurs. And so they tell you to do the same kind of test, right? To go in here and look for this nub. Just checking for this nub, though, may not be enough. That's why I like this other bulletin showing us that picture of what we should see from the side view. So let's go ahead and take a look at what's involved in this repair, because what we know at a minimum, we're going to have to replace the camshaft cover, but I think we're going to end up having to replace the intake manifold as well. I'll break this into two videos. We'll cover camshaft cover separately because you don't always have to replace both, but in this case I think that's what we're going to have to do. At a minimum, we're going to have to remove this intake manifold to better inspect and clean that diaphragm of that bypass valve. This is just a view of what's involved with the camshaft cover. So you're going to end up removing the coils, the ignition coil here, and we already removed that sight cover, and then there's just a series of bolts around here depending on the last time this gasket was replaced. It could be a real bear to get off, but since you're replacing it, you can be a little bit more aggressive in prying it off, and then it just gets replaced as a unit with both the cover and the gasket, and you torque it back down and you're done. All right, guys, let's go ahead and get going on removing this camshaft cover. We're going to start with the ignition coil connector. So if we zoom in over here, you should have this little orange retainer. Easiest way I've found to get these out is a kind of a wide flathead, just kind of coax them out. They're very fragile. Might block your view for just a second here. All right, well, you can see here this connector, even though I thought it was okay, it's kind of broke off internally now. I'm not sure how we even get it off now with that problem. Deal with this later. All right, one casualty. It's always something. Next, we're going to take off these T30s that are holding the ignition coil. This guy's just going to lift out as long as these are fully on and done. Sometimes these boots can get stuck in the spark plug wells. The other thing you want to do is, whoops, I meant to grab that with my finger. You want to inspect the electrodes on the springs while you have these, because they can get corroded. This one's okay. But if you find that it's all covered with green corrosion, you're going to want to replace that. And I'll put a video up here in the upper right on how you go about doing that. All right, next up. we're going to want to get this wiring harness piece over here off. To do that, we're going to need to release the tension. If we zoom back here, we've got this little clip here on this PCV pipe. We want to get this guy off like that. And then there's a different type here. We're going to push back with our finger and get that loosened up here. And then we're going to take this out here and here. So it's nice and loose. This is a really brittle pipe. So you want to make sure that there's no chance you're going to be putting any tension on it because it'll snap. And if you do get one that snaps, I've replaced them in the past. I'll put a video for that up in the upper right as well. All right, this next piece is probably the hardest thing. I hope it doesn't go like this connector over there. If we zoom in, there's two tabs here. And I'll bring you some light for this one. If we can find something magnetic. All right, so if you look in these little holes here and you zoom in, you can see there's like a little lever, right? Maybe this one's easier for you to see with the camera view. Yeah, see that little lever right there? It's going back. So that has to be pushed all the way back, and the easiest way I've seen to get this to work is put a small flathead screwdriver like this in front of that little lever and give it a twist, and then this will let go. Let's try this one here, put it right in front of that little lever, give it a twist. They can be a real pisser to let go because the piece they hold on to is part of this cover. All right, so we've got this off. Next thing we're going to go do, we want to get this wiring harness worked out of these little friction fit pieces here, 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 and over here. Because that's also part of the cover. All right. So with that out of the way, nothing is holding onto this cover. We'll have to kind of coax it out around from that one, but we're ready to start taking off these torx bolts. These are an E10 size. All right, we're just going to take a little magnet and make sure that these are all fully unthreaded. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take out, actually before I do this, I did notice a little piece of crud fell down into the spark plug well. I'm going to get some compressed air and blow these four out before we take this off. So let me go do that and we'll come back. All right, with that blown out, I'm going to remove this cap and we're going to remove the dipstick. It's a good time also to check to make sure that the two O-ring seals are still present on the dipstick. That's part of the crankcase sealing system. All right, with that out of the way, I'm just going to make one more check to make sure that everything is sufficiently out of the way here. And then we're going to take a pry bar and we're going to start to work this loose. Now this has been replaced with a gasket within the last few years, so it's going to be probably easier to get off than it would be if it had been longer than that. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. But let me get a pry bar. I'll show you the two pry points. All right, so if you zoom in here, the first place I'm going to start prying is right here where we see there's a ledge from the cylinder head where we can get a pry bar in here. And we're just going to slowly, gently try to coax this seal to let go. Now, since we're replacing it, you might say, well, why are you being so gentle with it? Well, it's not to protect this camshaft cover as much as not marring or scraping the aluminum. All right, so you can hear it let go there. Next, going to come over right here, do the same thing. And right here, and do the same thing. I'm going to come back over here, but a little bit more towards this side, do the same thing. If you're getting any strong resistance, double check to make sure you didn't miss one of the bolts, which is exactly what I just did. It was all dirty and covered with dust, and I didn't notice it. That's another reason to go nice and slow and not force anything. So we were seeing we were getting resistance on this corner, and that was what it was. All right, so with that done, we should be able to get her to let go the rest of the way by hand. Now again, keep your eye on this rigid pipe. You don't want to break it. And you want to get the harness on the other side of this cover. All right. Want to make sure nothing's caught here. She's basically let go. Sometimes these bolts will get a thread or two reattached. All right, we're just going to slide this out. Again, being careful with our rigid hose here. There we go. So the way this PCV system works, right? There's the diaphragm. Excuse me, there's the orifice cover. Diaphragm's inside. You can't see it. There's a better view of, if you zoom in here, there's the actual orifice hole right there that we were doing the test on. And then on the back side, it connects to this port, and then it routes around, connects to this port, and then it routes around and connects to these two ports. And this is all like plastic welded together. There's no way to service it or repair it or anything. You just have to replace the whole unit when this problem occurs. The gasket is still attached to the cylinder head. So let's pull that. And like I said, this one had a gasket put on not too long ago, so it's not going to be all broken. If it's been a while, what you'll find out is these things just crumble apart. I'm going really slow here because any dirt that might be sticking to this, I don't want inside this engine. There we go. That's the old gasket. Next thing we've got to do is clean up this mating surface all the way around with rags and brake clean and a soft scraper. I like to use a plastic scraper when I'm working on aluminum heads, or a brass scraper. And I'll bring you guys back when we get ready to do that, and also show you the service manual procedure. The bolts have to be put back in a certain order and at a certain torque value. We'll show that. And then also, if we come over here, just if I can wipe this up here, you can see a little bit of it left. There's just a little bit of it left here, but there's a seam here between the front engine cover, where the timing cover is here, and the cylinder head. And that seam has to be filled in on both this side and that side in the back with a sealant to help prevent leaks. So we're going to have to clean off the old RTV there and get ready to put new sealant on as well. All right, guys, we've got this cleaned up. If we zoom in a little bit, I used a brass scraper and a plastic scraper to not damage the aluminum. Not trying to get it clean enough to eat off of. You're trying to get it clean enough where it's not going to leak. So at this point, we're going to put the sealer on there. The sealer I'm going to be using is an AC Delco RTV engine sealant. And I will show you, after I get this done, the service manual pages that talk about this process. All right, so let's just puncture our seal here. All right, now we're ready to do this. We'll do this guy in the front. You can zoom in and see the amount that we're talking about here. I'll try to stay out of the way so you can see that. Let me just get this stuff started first. There we go. All right, so all you want to do is run it along the seam between the cylinder head and the timing cover, just like that. Do this piece back here. Now, you don't want a lot. If you put a lot on there, it actually could end up leaking because it'll end up putting a little gap underneath the gasket. But I am going to put a little bit more right in the front. I'm going to block your view for just a moment. All right. And I think I want to have just a little bit more right here. Kind of tapered off. Okay. Put our cap back on. Maybe it won't dry out the next time we need it. And let me show you what we're replacing this with. So what we're going to put on here is a GM 2520 3036. I'll bring this into your view. Right, but this is just new cover with the gasket, and we're going to go around and make sure the gasket is fully seated. Right, made in Poland, apparently. All right, so before we put this guy on, giving our sealer a little bit of time to set, I want to do one precautionary thing to make sure that we don't have any problems. So if we come back over here, I'm going to come to the front of this PCV pipe, and I'm going to open up this little clasp here, and actually a lot of times it just helps to take it off all the way. And I'm going to work this pipe off to make sure that we don't end up breaking it by accident. All right. Now, they normally don't come off that easily, but again, this one has been recently replaced, so it's not as rigid. All right. Now, with that safely out of the way, let's bring this guy in. Again, keeping sure that the gasket is fully seated, particularly on this side. It tends to want to pop off. We're going to work it under the harness on both ends. Get it around this pipe. And And just let it drop down onto our sealant, and then we'll start threading these bolts by hand into the aluminum. We'll take this wiring harness guy that we removed, right? We'll slide it back on top of those two mounting pieces, here and here, right? They're built into this cover. Snap it back in. Get our pipe. When you set this pipe in, the little hard line here at the bottom sits in the bottom of the little clip. There's an O-ring on the end of this pipe that we want to make sure is sitting on the inside. Sometimes it gets hung up down here, and you want to make sure it's inside the pipe. Right. I'm going to put that little metal clip back on to hold it. And now we're going to have to transfer the other clip that's still on the old cover. I just noticed that. All right. All right, I'm going to gently put these down, not going to torque them. All we're doing there is taking some of the slack out of the bolts. While I got it handy so it doesn't fall and get dirty, I'm going to put our dipstick back in, and we're going to put our oil cap back in. All right, let me get a torque wrench and we'll torque these guys down. All right, let's take a look at the service manual for this camshaft cover procedure on these 1.4 liters. RPO LUH, LUJ, possibly also LUV. Removing the ignition coil pack, removing the PCV ventilation hose. Then the hard thing is, when we get to it later, is removing electrical connections, but removing the wiring harness and getting it out from where it's tucked in here. There is two clips they'll show you. They're a real pisser to get to let go. After you get the PCV valve pipe out of here, I'll show you how you get those released. They're just talking about all these different things they want you to disconnect. We're going to skip all this. I'm going to show you don't have to do all this. Pull the dipstick, remove all these E10s, and then you can pry this guy off. And then when we get ready to install it, we're going to make sure that all these surfaces are cleaned, and we're going to put a very small 0.0787 of an inch. They're very specific here, but it's small, just around the seam between the timing cover and the cylinder head, here and here. I'll show you that. It's going to be a AC Delco RTV sealant that they reference in a different part of the service manual. Put this guy down, making sure the gasket's in place. Can't reuse the gasket. It's got to be new, and you got to make sure it's all the way seated before you do this. And then there's a specific torque sequence to the bolts. You got to do them in this order, or it's going to leak, and you're going to do it over again. So you're going to follow 1, 2, 3, right? I'm not going to go through all these. You can see it, right? It bounces around. It's like back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth, back, forth to get it down evenly. 71 inch-pounds on that. And then when we get ready to put this guy back in, those two clips are going to snap back in, presuming you didn't break them. We skipped all of this, so we won't have to do it. Put the ignition coil back in. I'll give you the torque value for those two T30s later. You're going to make sure you get dielectric grease on the boots. Hook up the PCV valve pipe. Make sure you get a little oil to make it go on nice and easy with the O-ring. Check the oil level, and you're ready to go. All right, 71 inch-pounds starting here. I guess I missed taking the slack out of this one. All right, and then here, this is number 2. If you think back to that service manual page that I showed you earlier. And then number 3 is here. And then number 4 is back here. And then number 5, I'm just kind of referencing our manuals back here. And then number 6 is down here. This sequence is important to avoid leaks. If you don't follow it, you're going to be doing the job again. That's just how these GM engines are. And again, 71 inch-pounds. Number 8's back here, next to the diaphragm. Number 9, where's number 9? Number 9 is over here. Number 10 is here. Number 11 is here. Number 12 is here. Number 13 is here. Number 14 is here. Number 15 is back in the back here, or I should say on the far passenger side. And at that, we're done. I like to just go back all the way around and make sure. And we're going to need to let this sealant set up for 30 minutes before we start the engine. All right, what's next? We take our coil pack and we're going to put some AC Delco dielectric grease, AC Delco 104064 or 12345579. This is particularly important on these engines because of what I said to you earlier about them being very susceptible to getting moisture-induced corrosion on these electrodes. All this does, this has not anything to do with electricity. This makes it waterproof. There's some dried up grease there. And again, make sure that you've blown out your plug wells. Let's push it back on top of the plugs. We'll put our T30s in by hand. We'll go ahead and put our broken connector back on. And we'll run the T30 down. And then we'll go get the torque wrench. We'll take a torque wrench and we'll torque that down as well. All right, and these are 71 inch-pounds also. All right, and with that in place, we can let the sealant set up, and then we can rerun the test, and we'll show that this diaphragm is intact, and we no longer have a problem. So we'll come back in a half hour. All right, while that sealant is drying, guys, we need this PCV pipe clamp. It's on the back side of the old cover. So you can see right here, if we zoom in, there's like a little tab piece. I'm going to push that back with my thumb, just like that. Wiggle it off, and then we'll be able to transplant this just going to lift our hard line out here just a little bit for a second. We'll transplant it right back here on the back. Just like so. Get the little line goes under and the big line goes inside. And snap it back. All right, so that's done. All right, guys, zoom in. What about this problem here? You know, we were so careful that we didn't want this little safety clip, this orange safety clip, to break. But what ended up breaking was this hard, brittle plastic. When we were trying to push this down, it just gave out on us. So, and we're going to have to replace this whole connector. This is fine for the owner to take the vehicle now because we repaired the original complaint. But I'll put this on for free for them. I'll show you. I'll put a link when I do this repair, either up here or down as a pinned comment. It's pretty simple. We're just going to replace this connector and get a whole new fresh piece of plastic. All right, guys, it's been 30 minutes, plenty of time for the sealant to set up. I'm going to start up the engine now, and we're going to repeat our test and make sure that we've repaired this. I don't feel anything at all, and I don't hear anything at all. All right, yep. It's not staying. Fixed. All right, that repair is fixed. Like I was saying at the beginning, whenever something like this breaks, you got to figure out why it broke. We're going to go ahead and put the engine sight shield back on and make sure that these guys are where they're supposed to be. And we're done. All right, guys, a couple of things before we wrap up here. I want to take the O-ring that's on our oil cap and replace it. So let's get this old one off, because this is the original one from 2012. Whenever I change the camshaft cover on these engines, I like to swap all this stuff out. All right. So it looks like that, and we're going to replace it with a GM part 5558 2541. This will just give us a better seal, right? Just get some of that oil that's already on here on there. Oh yeah, that's nice and tight. If you ever get one of these and it's loose after you apply it, that's the problem. The O-ring is shot. Same thing on the dipstick. Get the oil off of here. You can see there's these two O-rings I mentioned earlier in the video. I also like to change these out. Sometimes they're still a little pliable, sometimes they're brittle and they just break up as you take them off. Like that. That's why you replace them, when they get old and brittle and they just break like that. Okay, I'm going to set this guy right here for a moment. And we're going to replace that with two of these GM 55, 59, 4385 parts. Fish this guy out of here. Come on. Run him on. Okay, and then I got another one in here. Same part number. I'll put links to these parts in the description as well. And bring this guy on. You can see it's tapered at the end here. Works good to get these guys on here. And again, just take some of the oil that's already on there, and we'll be good to go with this as well. Oops. Get in there. Yeah, nice and snug. You want to feel it nice and snug because it seals that up. All right, let's keep going. Again, I've linked the repair that we did. We had this problem here. We had a confirmed problem with the PCV orifice diaphragm being busted and creating a vacuum leak. We believe that the intake manifold was the source of that, and I linked that video up at the top separately. So between the two, since the code was intermittent and not staying on all the time, I believe this is what will do the repair. If you got questions or comments about how to do this job yourself, go ahead and leave them below. If you found this video useful in saving you money to do this camshaft cover replacement, I appreciate you paying it forward by hitting that like button. And as always, thanks for watching.